CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Nepal's worst air disaster in 3 decades. At least 68 people are dead as a passenger plane crashes near a popular tourist destination. Rescue workers search for survivors after a Russian strike hits an apartment block in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, killing at least 25 people. State of emergency declared in parts of Peru after weeks of anti-government protests that have left dozens dead. And heads of state, business leaders and financial institutions head to Davos in Switzerland, the first Winter World Economic Forum in 3 years. At least 68 people are known to have died in a plane crash in central Nepal, the country's worst air disaster in 3 decades. The domestic flight came down near the popular tourist city of Pokhara, around 150 kilometres northwest of Kathmandu. 72 people were on board. Rescuers have been struggling to reach the crash site, which is in a gorge between 2 hills. Our correspondent Naweed Jabarkil has more details and a warning that his report contains video of the plane just before it crashed, which viewers may find distressing.
The desperate search for survivors in central Nepal after a passenger plane carrying 72 people crashed near Pokhara International Airport. Among those on board, at least 15 foreign nationals. It's the country's deadliest air crash in 5 years.
The incident was tragic. The full force of the Nepali Army Police has been deployed for rescue.
In the capital Kathmandu, where the flight took off from, families gathered at the city's airport, demanding answers. Investigators are looking into the cause of the Yeti Airlines crash. The airport, which was just a mile away from where the ATR-72 aircraft came down, was only opened in recent weeks. Some local residents who rushed to help at the scene said the pilot appeared to divert the plane away from nearby villages, possibly averting a bigger disaster. Air incidents and accidents are nothing new in Nepal. The mountainous terrain, along with hazardous weather conditions, make flying more dangerous here. And airports are often basic and in remote locations in one of the world's poorest nations. But aviation remains central to Nepal's tourism-dependent economy, despite the risk of costly and tragic scenes like this. Naweed Jabarkil, CGTN.
Our correspondent Pema Darshana has been at the crash site in Pokhara.
The plane which was about to land, Yeti Airlines, which was about to land in the newly opened Pokhara International Airport. So the plane crashed on its way. So it has crashed over a very deep Sethi River gorge. The gorge, which is just about 2 meters wide and astonishingly 30 meters deep. So about 72 people have lost their lives in this unfortunate crash, along with the crew, and the rescue operation is still going on. And because of the depth of the gorge and also because of its terrain, it's very, very difficult for the rescue operation to even recover the bodies. And in fact, today was a national festival, 1st of March, which is celebrated over here with a lot of pomp and festivity that has come to a total halt because of this unfortunate incident which took place in Pokhara this morning. So the entire country is mourning. The Prime Minister of Nepal, Mr. Prachanda Dahal, has called for an emergency meeting this afternoon, and tomorrow has been declared a national holiday to mourn those who lost their lives in this unfortunate incident.
At least 25 people are dead and dozens are missing after a Russian airstrike hit a residential building in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. Rescue workers have been digging for survivors after the building was partly destroyed in Russia's largest wave of strikes in 2 weeks. It comes as the British government says it will send Challenger 2 tanks to bolster its support for Kyiv's war effort. Well, our correspondent Stephanie Freed is in Kyiv. So, Stephanie, what's the latest on what's happened in Dnipro?
Well, Robin, you were talking about the numbers of the victims, and it just seems to keep rising. Now the number is at 25 people who have died, who have been killed. There are dozens that are missing in the ruins of the apartment complex there, and more than 70 who have been injured. You know, this hit on the Dnipro complex happened as a barrage of high-caliber missiles were fired upon and hitting cities throughout the country. And this specific complex was hit very, very hard. Within the relatively few hours after the hit, Dnipro's deputy mayor talked about the fact that they could hear, the rescuers could hear people screaming from inside or within the rubble, and they would stop their work so they could hear the screams and possibly rescue more people. That people beneath the rubble were sending SMS messages, help for rescue, taking into account that this hit happened as the sun was about to set, or it was about to go into evening hours. It falls well below zero here at night. Now the mayor of Dnipro is saying that there's a slim chance of finding anyone alive there. So certainly the country is in mourning. They're watching this in horror and concerned about further swarms or attacks or multiple hits on cities throughout the country. Robin.
And Stephanie, how has Ukraine reacted to the confirmation that the UK government will send Challenger 2 tanks to the country?
Certainly that's encouraging news for Ukrainians. They've been asking for tanks. The officials here they keep asking. They've not stopped asking for tanks. So, yes, this is encouraging news. And certainly the advantages of the Challenger 2 tanks, 14 of those are going to come from the UK. The fact that they're long range, the fact that they have image sensing systems so that they can be used for night operations, thermal imaging. They also have a laser range, so that takes into account temperature and wind variations before hitting a target. Also, reportedly, it is a better tank than anything that it would be facing on the Russian side out on the battlefield. And as well, its protective armor is top quality, so top quality that what it's made of is kept secret. However, it's not enough, according to the officials here, or it's a good start, but they want more. Ukraine's officials, military, political, they want more offensive, they want more defensive, early warning systems, detection, missile interception systems. Let's take a listen to Ukraine's president.
Can Russian terror be stopped? Yes. Is it possible to do it somehow differently than on the battlefield in Ukraine? Unfortunately, no. It can and must be done on our land, in our sky, in our sea. What is needed for this? Those weapons that are in the depots of our partners and which our troops are so waiting for.
And what they're hoping here in Kyiv, the officials, the powers that be, they're hoping that this Challenger 2 forthcomingness on the part of the UK will open the floodgates from other countries, from Europe and from other countries, for more of that, what we're talking about, offensive and defensive, high caliber, the material that they want here to be able to fight with and go on the offensive and protect themselves. Robin.
Stephanie, thank you very much. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed in Kyiv. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova has more now from Moscow.
Well, indeed, the Russian president said that there was positive dynamics in what Moscow describes as its special military operation in Ukraine. Having said that, the Russian president said that everything was developing within the framework of the plan developed by the Russian Ministry of Defense and General Staff. He also said and expressed hope that the Russian troops would deliver further gains after the Solidar situation, when the Russian troops have actually managed to take control of the salt mining city. The Russian president was also talking about the Russian economy, saying that that was stable despite all odds, despite all sanctions and all expectations, both by the international experts and by the Russian experts, who were all suggesting that the Russian economy would collapse. But that did not happen. He stressed that the unemployment was one of the key indicators, and that was at historic low, and that inflation was on the downward trend, and that was in fact not as high as in many other European countries. So in general, the Russian president has delivered a very strong message that everything that is going on is going according to the plan.
And we've also heard, haven't we, from the Ministry of Defence, which has been talking about those strikes in Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. The Russian Defense Ministry has confirmed that on Saturday they carried out a wave of missile strikes against the military command system of Ukraine, as well as the energy infrastructure. Now, according to Moscow, this infrastructure is one way or another related to the military infrastructure of Ukraine. Now, they say that all of the designated targets have been hit. The briefing by the Russian Defense Ministry, though, didn't mention specifically Dnipro as one of those targets. Now, what they had said, though, was that there was some positive dynamics on the direction of Bakhmut. The Russian troops have, according to Russian Defense Ministry, managed to make certain advancement closer to these cities. So indeed, that is an important development for the Russian side after the capture of Solidar.
Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheva reporting from Moscow. Some other stories making the news now, and a 7-year-old girl and 5 others have been injured in a drive-by shooting in central London. A remembrance service was being held at a church when shots were reportedly fired from a moving vehicle on Saturday. No one has been arrested. Thousands of people in California are still without power as the US state braces for more bad weather. President Biden has approved a state of emergency, freeing up federal aid. The latest flood warnings have been issued for the region north of San Francisco Bay. And another 5 pages of classified material have been found in President Biden's family home in Delaware. The White House says the president's lawyer found the documents on Thursday and immediately handed them to the Justice Department. Special counsel is already investigating Biden's handling of classified documents. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Getting the world to cooperate on the big global challenges. Politicians and business leaders discuss how at the World Economic Forum. We're in Davos next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
This week on Razor, the innovative company turning CO2 into stone. And we meet a family leading the way in sustainable mussel farming in the UK.
You can grow trees or seaweed or whatever else you want that takes carbon out of the atmosphere, but it releases it pretty quickly. With mussel shells or any other bivalve shell, it's millions of years, so we're taking it out of circulation.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Nepal's worst air disaster in 3 decades. At least 68 people are dead as a passenger plane crashes near a popular tourist destination. Rescue workers search for survivors after a Russian strike hits an apartment block in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, killing at least 25 people. The world's political and business leaders will arrive in the Swiss mountain resort of Davos this week for the World Economic Forum. It's the first winter meeting in 3 years and comes amid global economic and political turmoil. Well, our correspondent Juliet Mann is in Davos. So, Juliet, this really does come at a pivotal moment, doesn't it?
It really does, Robin. And you can see, look, it's snowing behind me now, but it's been the warmest winter in Europe and many other parts of the world for such a long time, which has really thrown the climate change debate front and centre and how that is affecting the global economy as well. Most countries around the world are on the brink of recession if they're not already in it. And that's why the organisers here are saying to me that the goal of this gathering has got to be to transform the global economy. What they want to do is do that in the near term. So we're talking in 3 to 5 years, that kind of time frame. And they'll do that by finding simple solutions to long-term risks. And the way to do that, they're saying, is through cooperation. So concerted, collective action from a public and a private point of view. And they've got to do that before these crises reach their tipping point. So we have to think about it. We've got, threats to peace, to prosperity, to the future of our planet. All of those risks are increasing. And then we've got those catastrophic, immediate things to handle. The war in Ukraine, recovery from COVID. And what the World Economic Forum says is the biggest risk of all in the short term and also in the long term, and that's the cost of living crisis. And that encompasses energy, food security, and of course emerging debt issues relating to inflation. But the managing director of the World Economic Forum says China reopening might determine the global economy's fate. Take a listen.
Trade has not fallen off as much as a lot of people think. Trade is actually still quite strong between China and the rest of the world. And, we've seen the pressure that was placed on supply chains, shortages of critical goods, resources, and so on. So some of that easing up will be actually helpful to actually reduce inflationary pressures. And I think a lot of people are looking forward to the demand being generated in the Chinese domestic economy. There's anticipation of some loosening in the real estate sector, wanting to reinvigorate consumer demand at a national level. And this will actually help contribute to global growth. Kristalina Georgieva recently came out saying that, 1/3 of the global economy was potentially likely to go into recession this year. China coming back into the economy will actually help reduce much of that pressure.
Well, as the markets are adjusting their risk appetite, it's really looking like 2023 is going to shape up to be a year marked by uncertainty and also really varied from region to region, which makes this cooperation that we're talking about all the more challenging. So you're thinking, well, OK, there's a lot of talk about it here, but what about turning it into action? Well, in terms of specific progress based on previous Davos conversations, that they are going to make dozens of announcements on a range of issues, from climate to other things, including helping 1 billion people become more digitally connected and enabled. And they say that examples like that will really showcase the potential of cooperating in a fragmented world. So who's coming? Who's coming? Well, we've got this fantastic list from Hollywood, like Idris Elba, to, of course, world leaders, politicians, economists, academia, people from civil society. We know that speaking on the main stage, we're going to have China's Vice Premier, Liu He, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission, Antonio Guterres from the United Nations, and then various prime ministers like Spain's Pedro Sanchez, Finland's Sanna Marin. But the only G7 leader that we know is coming for sure is Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So while many of the other G7 are sending quite high-level delegations, we're not going to see Emmanuel Macron or Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, unless, Robin, they surprise us, as some leaders have done in the past. CGTN team, we're here to bring you all the news and everything you need to know about the World Economic Forum in Davos, if they do show up.
Juliet, we will speak again tomorrow, no doubt. That's our Juliet Mann in Davos. China's Foreign Minister Qin Gang is in Egypt as part of his visit to Africa. He's met Egypt's President and Foreign Minister and held talks with the Secretary-General of the League of Arab States. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Adel El-Marouchi, who is in Cairo. So what was talked about in these meetings?
The Chinese foreign minister began his day here in Cairo with the Egyptian president, through which the two have been discussed the bilateral ties and how to boost cooperation between Egypt and China in all fields. Already, Egypt was one of the first, actually the first country in the Middle East and Africa to sign the comprehensive strategic partnership with China, and that has seen huge progress in terms of industrial trade and cooperation with China in fields of technology and space sciences, and they want to see that go further. In his meeting with the Egyptian foreign minister, Cairo invited or focused the talks on the tourism sector, where Egypt is looking forward for China to have collaboration in that sector by encouraging more Chinese tourists to come to Egypt. In general, Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang said that Egypt and China's cooperation and foundation of ties goes all the way back to ancient history, and he sees that there is potential for it to grow further. Let's have a listen.
China and Egypt are bonded through their historic friendship, and their relationship has reached a strategic partnership level. And in the last few years, it's witnessed a huge leap in relations because of the common strategy between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
So what has the media response been to Qin Gang's visit?
Well, it's a continuation of China's foreign policy that has been strongly showcased to be pro-Africa. For over 30 years, China has maintained this annual habit through which every new year, after the calendar counts for a new year, the first foreign visit by a Chinese foreign minister would be to a tour in Africa, to visit some African states. That's a habit that has been ongoing since the 90s, and it only confirms the potential of the relations between China and Africa. So seeing this tradition happening and still continuing, and this time the tour for Qin Gang started with Ethiopia, it went through Central Africa and then ended with North Africa, so it also puts a highlight on how China is trying to develop and maintain strong ties with the entire continent. It also comes after the first China-Arab summit that was held in Saudi Arabia late last year, and through which Arab countries have discussed a plan to build stronger collaboration with China through all fields from educational research to business and industries. And that comes also after Qin Gang's met with the Secretary General of the Arab League here in Egypt to confirm that this is just the beginning of a new pathway through which what the leaders have been discussing in Saudi Arabia will start to see some implementations from now onwards.
Adel, thank you very much. Our correspondent Adel El-Marouchi in Cairo. A state of emergency has been declared in Lima and other parts of Peru after weeks of protests that have left at least 42 people dead. Supporters of ousted President Pedro Castillo have been calling for fresh elections and the removal of new President Dina Boluarte, who has refused to step down. Our correspondent Dan Collins reports.
After the deadliest week in more than a month of anti-government protests and unrest, President Boluarte spoke to the nation in a televised address on Friday. Weeks of protests have left scores dead since early December, when former leader Pedro Castillo was ousted and detained after he tried to illegally dissolve Congress.
I can't stop repeating my regret for the deaths of Peruvians at the protests, both our civilian compatriots and the valued police officer that lost his life ill-fatedly. I apologize for this situation and for what hasn't been done to avoid these tragic events.
While the angry and sometimes violent protests took place in southern Peru on Thursday, thousands marched through the capital demanding the closure of Congress and Boluarte's resignation. 3 ministers resigned and were swiftly replaced on Friday as Boluarte, the 7th president in 6 years, said she would not step down.
Some voices coming from the violent and radical groups demand my resignation, bringing chaos, disorder and destruction to the people. I say to them responsibly that I will not step down. My commitment is with Peru and not with a tiny group that is hurting our homeland.
The Attorney General has launched inquiries into more than 3 dozen deaths of civilians. 1 police officer was also killed. The top prosecutor also launched a preliminary inquiry into Boluarte and her leading ministers for genocide and homicide. A mission of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights ended a visit to Peru, calling on the government to guarantee the proportionate use of force, to foster dialogue and to show empathy with the families of the victims of the violence.
La comisión recibió denuncias. The Commission received reports of indiscriminate shootings against demonstrators in certain regions such as Ayacucho, as well as other reports of shots aimed at vital parts of the body with lethal and high-caliber weapons in violation of the principle of the gradual use of force.
Police and soldiers have been accused by human rights groups of excessive force on protesters by releasing tear gas from helicopters and using live ammunition. The security forces say protesters, mostly in the southern Andes, used homemade weapons and explosives against them. Dan Collins, CGTN, Lima.
The headlines again. Nepal's worst air disaster in 3 decades. At least 68 people are dead as a passenger plane crashes near a popular tourist destination. Rescue workers search for survivors after a Russian strike hits an apartment block in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, killing at least 25 people. And a state of emergency is declared in parts of Peru after weeks of anti-government protests that have left dozens dead. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's Razor. For now, from all of the team here in London, goodbye.